Today I'm going to talk to you about vocabulary instruction that you can use for any lesson. Okay? Because no matter what content you teach, English, anatomy, any content area, there should be some vocabulary instruction going on. So, a little bit about me. Who am I? My name is Liz. I'm from Kentucky in the United States. I have an MA in TESOL, which is teaching English to speakers of other languages. Right now, I'm the Assistant Director of Academics for the English PYD at KFU, King Faisal University. I've been working with Saudi students for about 9 years now, here in Hassa. Love Hassa very much. This is my second home. I've also been a self-study coordinator for the program accreditation. So I just basically know a lot of the technical jargon that's used in the teaching field. So that's just a little bit about me. So let's talk first about why. Why is vocabulary important? Because I've just told you that it is, but it's always really very important to answer why. So I want you to talk to each other if you can. It's kind of nice because you're sitting in pairs mostly. So if you could just talk to the people around you about discussing why do you think vocabulary is important for student learning in any subjects. Okay, so just talk. I'll give you a couple minutes. Let's just, does anybody want to offer some examples that they talked about in their group? Yes?
I think vocabulary instructions, especially teaching in the class, it's important to the students so we can tell them what is the context we are talking in, because maybe the meaning will be changed according to our class.
Very important. The context is very important. I'm glad you brought that up. We're going to talk about that. Anything else, Aida?
I was saying that vocabulary is the foundation of any language. If you don't have the vocabulary, you can't express yourself. You can't have a conversation with someone if you don't have the foundation.
Yeah, foundation. You think about the pyramid.
Exactly.
The vocabulary's got to be there. Yeah, you're right. In the back?
I guess using vocabulary can conclude many things, and for example, for anatomy, we can conclude a lot of things in specific vocabs or specific terms, and maybe
Yes.
make summaries for things.
Yes, it helps the students to make a map.
To concentrate.
Yes, of the concepts.
Yeah, I just want to say when the vocabulary is clear for the student, even for everyone, they will be able to understand you very well and paraphrase or deliver their information or message to you back by their own words, by their own vocabulary, when the vocabulary is simple.
Right. So basically, the purpose of any language learning, whether it's in a specific content area like anatomy or other subjects, or it's an English learning classroom, is so that the students will be able to use the language, right? To either perform a task, to understand a concept, right? Or to actually communicate with another person. So it all serves a very important purpose. So I don't want you to just believe me. Let's think about what did this expert say, because I'm not an expert yet. Okay, maybe one day, but I'm not. So what do the experts say who've written about this? So vocabulary is knowledge. They're the same, okay? Without vocabulary, there is no knowledge. Vocabulary knowledge is knowledge. The knowledge of a word not only implies a definition, but it also applies how that word fits into the world. That's the context that you were talking about. Okay, so that's from Solve in 2005. Also, reading comprehension is dependent on knowledge of vocabulary. Okay, the two are interlinked. They're not separate. So your students, anything they need to read for their studies, any concepts they need to learn, they cannot do it. Hirsch found that readers must know 90% of the vocabulary of a text in order to comprehend words from context. So even words that they don't know within a text, they can't figure them out unless they know 90% of the words. And he said that for some learners, this is as high as 95% of the words. Okay? So you can imagine now how much challenging it is for your students if there's a major lack in vocabulary when they're reading. So vocabulary knowledge and language use are complementary. They go together. Nation found that knowledge of vocabulary enables language use. while language use leads to an increase in the vocabulary knowledge. So the two are going together, okay? They're not separate. Okay, so all of that, that's what the experts say. So I think we're getting a picture that, you know, they're pretty important. So if we summarize all this, we're basically saying that vocabulary usage is extremely important, whether in a language learning classroom or in a content area classroom. So any subject that you guys are teaching, there needs to be some vocabulary usage put into your lessons. Okay? Even if you're doing a lecture style, we have to have something in there for the students. So, how do we do this? That's just a little funny comment about students. If you watch more colors, you will understand that and why that's funny. So, vocabulary instruction. Research says there are two types of ways that students learn vocabulary. They learn it indirectly and directly. Okay, and most of it is learned indirectly. So if indirectly, they are through having conversations, being read to, and reading independently. So now you understand why, as a second language learner, it's extremely important for us to motivate our students to read outside the classroom and to talk and speak and communicate as much as they can in their second language. Because when they are studying in that second language, the more they're using the language, the easier it is for them to grasp the content, the concepts that you need them to learn. If they don't get adequate practice, they won't get the concepts. Because you all know, sciences are not easy. You need to be able to form these concepts in your mind. And in order to do that, you need a good base of vocabulary. The direct learning, this is what I specifically want to talk to today, is explicitly taught words and the word learning strategies you use. So these are words that you cover in your class with your students, and you use some kind of word learning strategy. What I'm meaning is not that you just project the word and say, this is sleep. Sleep means, and then you move on to the next word. That's not really a word learning strategy, because that's teacher talking and not student talking, which we'll also talk about.
Can you take a picture?
Actually, I can give you this presentation.
Yeah.
I can send it to Mem and she can send it to everyone. Okay? So, teaching vocabulary, direct instruction. What does direct instruction mean if we break it down? It's a small number of words that are taught intensely within a lesson. So I know, probably like most programs, you have a long list of vocab, and you need the students to learn it. Don't teach all of them in every lesson. They can't absorb all of them in every lesson. Pick specific number. They say no more than 7. That's the general rule for second language learners. Pick some that are extremely important for the concept that you want them to get that day in that lesson. So a small number of words. The instruction is systematic and continuous, where the students are exposed to the same word in different contexts. The same word in different contexts. So if I'm thinking about sleep, I would definitely want to cover sleep. I probably would talk about sleep deprivation. I would talk about the habits of sleep, and I would use all the language that surrounds that key vocabulary word. And I'm using sleep because it's in my presentation later. Okay, game-like activities are incorporated. ESL teachers use game activities. If you're doing more of a lecture style and you feel like games are inappropriate, there's a really good way for you to incorporate games for your students. There are programs online, which I know a lot of teachers in this room have used, such as quizzes, Quizlet, Kahoot, okay? These are interactive. You don't have to do them in class. You assign them to your students. Your students can do them on their own, on their phone. And they're very interactive, and they're a great way to practice vocabulary and to make sure that your students are understanding the concepts that they need those vocabulary for. So it's not something that has to be done in the classroom. It can also be done outside of the classroom and help students with that indirect learning that the previous slide was talking about.
I can say something about games because I was laughing when I did this. I did it
Good.
spontaneously like this in the class. I was teaching about budgeting, and budgeting is a tough concept. It's
Yes.
not easy to understand. So I was focusing only on three terminologies,
Mhm.
new terminologies in budgeting, and they are connected to each other. They are in process, and
Yes.
first step, second, and third. So I asked the three students to come in front of all the class, and each one named herself as with the concept, and then she read what does this mean to the whole class, and now they start to work as they are the actual concepts, not يعني, by their names, by their definition, and what is the role of each one in the process of budgeting. I don't know, is this what you mean by a game or?
Yeah, because the games, it can be anything that's making the students interact with the teacher or with each other. Right? It can be anything. You can turn it. It almost seems like a game. That's why I think it says game-like. It's any activity where the students are interacting with each other and with the concepts that you want them to learn. Not where the teacher is just standing and talking, much like this. So I'm not teaching you, I'm training you. Training and teaching are different. If I were teaching you, my talk would be very minimal, and I would hope that yours would be the most of the class. So attention paid to the meanings of word parts. I'll talk about that a little bit later, but teaching students some ways to figure out how the words are, even words they don't know. The suffixes, the prefixes, this can be really helpful, especially in the sciences because they're pretty standard. And the context and the dictionary are studied. So you mentioned context earlier, it's very important, and of course, we do want students to use dictionaries, but also, once they've looked up a word in the dictionary, being able to create their own definition. What does this word mean to me? So, I've been mentioning this a lot, so I'll talk about it before we continue into the examples of what we can do to teach. So, student-teacher talk time. So, STT, student-teacher talk time. TTT, teacher talk time. Okay? This is a training, so I'm talking a lot. But if I was teaching, as you were students, then I would expect that 30% of the time I would be talking, and 70% of the time my students would be talking. Now, this is contrary to what you think. You're like, wait, then what am I doing? A lot. And it's actually more difficult than if you just talk, right? Because you are actually having to engage the students and make sure they're staying on task and making sure that they're understanding the concept and they're on the right path. So being a guide is actually quite a bit more difficult than just presenting. Okay? So like, for example, if you have a 90-minute class, if the teacher is talking for 75% of the time, that's about 68 minutes, that leaves 22 minutes left for the students. If you only have 10 students in your class, that means they're talking for 2 minutes each of that whole 90-minute class. Okay? If we're wanting students who are language learners to be able to use and communicate in second language, we have to maximize in every content area the amount that the students are using the language. So a large amount of teacher talk time. What it means that you've got a long stretch of time, much like what I'm doing, where the teacher is talking and it's boring for students. So what happens to the students when you talk a lot? You probably know. What happens to the students? They sleep.
Play with their phone.
They play with their phone. They will just sort of, they may be even looking at you,
Yeah,
but
they're
they're
not there.
somewhere else. Their mind is like, oh, I'm gonna wash the dishes when I get home, and oh, my mom told me that I need to call this person. Oh yeah, we are gonna go to the mall this weekend. Right? They're in their mind.
Les, I have an opinion about this. I'm teaching since 1986, so that's long time. And I'm teaching tough subject like epidemiology. I have to ask a student to understand the prevalence, morbidity, mortality, all of this stuff. As you said, I explain the concept and I create different activity in the classroom. And I read the article and I ask the student to explain the article. I work from the article and give examples, the math. As you said, I need here this part of it depends about the capabilities and how much of the, of course, the member expertise and have different academic background to reach teacher 20% only and students 70%.
Well, look.
I mean, this is because it's hard. It's not,
Yeah.
it's not an easy. But this is my opinion.
at the end of the day, I'm not asking you or anyone else in the room to completely change how you teach overnight. All I'm doing is giving you what the experts say right now in the field of education, and what they say is best for students to learn concepts in any content area if they are a second language learner. So if you are teaching a concept in Arabic, these rules don't apply because your students know Arabic and they have the vocabulary and the knowledge to discuss something in Arabic. But if you are ever teaching a concept in English, then it's going to be different. Because anything that you need to teach in English or any lesson that you need to give that uses English vocabulary, you have to implement some of these strategies. So it doesn't mean that maybe this is what your classroom is going to look like, right? But
as I said, the more you have to make your student all the time, otherwise you'll be in another world.
yes, they do. They doze off, right? So really with teacher talk time, it's really that we want to keep the students focused. So the only way to do that is to engage them in the material, to make them do things. Make them think about what we want them to think about. So the other big problem with this is that the teacher will not have an idea of whether or not the student understands the concept, okay? Because if you're just talking, your students, you don't know, did they get this concept, right? So I have to interact with the students, and I can't just ask, do you understand? Is this clear?
All of them say yes, but
They all say yes, and they never ask a question, right? They just want to go on through the lesson. Yeah, so we all have the same problems. We all have the same problems with students. So, how can we decide? What can we do? How can we decide which words do we need to teach in direct instruction? Because we can't teach all of them, right? We need to teach the most important ones. And so, what do we do to decide? So, there is some experts. One of them, Beck, created this tier of vocabulary. And this is actually really useful for anybody in any field. I love this since I took a course in vocabulary over the summer. It was one of the best things I did. You know, everybody was freaked out about coronavirus. Mm-hmm. What did Liz do? She went online and took online classes.
Exactly.
Distraction. Okay, so 3 things. Tier 1, vocabulary. Basic words that generally don't require instruction. These are words that you only use in one context. Chair, table, dog, mom, cat. You know, basic words that students should know. Now, as an L2 learner, they may not know some of them. It may take a minute, but that's tier 1 vocab. That's not really what we're concerned about because we're teaching mostly content areas, and even in English, the level is a little too high for tier 1 vocab. So most of what we deal with is tier 2 and tier 3. Tier 2 are academic words that are used in most fields, that are used as comprehension, and they're for mature language learners. So that's our group of students here, right? So examples would be curious, gaze, mysterious, stingy. I have more examples on the second, but you've probably seen things like academic word lists, these kind of things. So these are used across fields, right? Across all the fields. Whereas tier 3 words, these are very low frequency. You don't see them a lot. They're content-specific words. Renal. If you're not studying anatomy, who would use the word renal? Nobody, right? Even most people don't know what renal means.
Right.
Most people would use the word kidney in English, right? Okay? So these are words like morphine, peninsula, similes, nucleus. See, right? They've got all the different content areas. Okay, that's the differences between. I've got another slide of some examples.
Oh, sorry, tier 3, that means it's not going to be specific for the specific course.
Correct. Right to a content area. So here, tier 1, cold, cat, tired, walk, talk, look. We all use them. They're very common words. Tier 2 words, contradict, proceed, retrospect, reality, mention. These are words that you can use in any field, but they are academic words. So mature language users are going to use them. We're definitely going to use them also when we are writing academic research papers. Tier 3 words are specific to your content area. So chloroplast, metamorphosed, a cast would only be used in talking about religion. Factorization is math, right? Traitorous, probably in history, right? So they're very specific to that content area. Okay? So first we need to know, how do we break up the words? So let's do a little experiment together, because I don't want to just do all this. Let's see if you can guess. I took this, I'll just let you know. This is from an electrical engineering. Nobody in here is an electrical engineer, correct? I guess right. So this is a title of an article that was published in an electrical engineering journal. So you're probably looking at it and you're like, this makes no sense. Unfortunately, this is what your students do when they look at their textbook. This makes absolutely no sense, right? So let's just try to look at it and see if we can decide which words in here could we probably put as tier 2? Because there are some words you read and you understand that word, right? You probably know this word, right? We know these 3 words. We know this word.
Yes.
We know this word.
Yes.
Right? We know this word.
Yes.
Those are tier 2 words.
Yes.
The words that you probably recognize are tier 2 because they appear in all of the content areas, right? But what? Right? This is, I saw it, okay? Hydrothermal is actually, I think, a tier 2 word because they use it in multiple. And also, if you know, hydrothermal just means hot water, right? Water, thermal, heat, so hot water. Okay? But what's a bender? I don't know what a bender is. It seems to be stabilized, but then it's decomposing. Okay, so anyway, I was curious and I looked this up. This is actually just talking about mathematical models that actual electrical engineers use. There's apparently some, that's stochastic, actually is just another fancy word for a type of model. Okay, so, yeah, but when you read it, you're like, oh, but that's your students, that's how your students feel. So as a teacher, I want to know what my tier 3 words are because I'm definitely going to have to focus on those because I can't have any expectation that my students are going to know those tier 3 words. Okay? They're not going to know the tier 3. They may know the tier 2, they may not, but I really in class have to focus on those tier 3 words that I know my students are not going to understand. So let's recap. We've had a little bit of things here, and I really like this graphic. So this is more talking about elementary school, but it applies even for second language learners, that vocabulary is the best single indicator of an intellectual ability and an accurate predictor of success at school. This stays true. Unfortunately, for your students who come here who didn't have as good vocabulary, they have to study harder.
Yeah.
That's just the truth. The students who have a better vocabulary grasp, the amount they need to study is a little bit less because they can understand the concepts easier. So we talked about these 2. We know what indirect learning is and what direct learning is. Okay? We just discussed this. Okay? So we're going to have to focus on tier 3 in class. We know that tier 2, they might not understand. Okay? Here, any program, this is going to have to be there. Encouraging students to do independent reading. Using word learning strategies in the class. Teaching our students to use their own word learning strategies. What works for them? Word consciousness, understanding that, oh wait, I don't know what that word means, or I do, I kind of know what it means. Specific word instruction. So again, we have to specifically teach them the words. Remember that your students don't just know or not know a word. There's a degree to which they know a word or they don't know a word. Okay? So there's from unknown to acquainted to established. Because I might know when I hear somebody say, for example, how are you? And I answer, I'm fine. I might know to say automatically, I'm fine. But if I ask a student, what does fine mean? Maybe, right? So I think what students do is they know they automate their responses when we're doing language, but they really don't know that fine just means good. Everything is okay.
Yeah.
Okay? And so some words they think they know, but they're really just acquainted with the use. They don't have an established knowledge of what the word is, which means they can't build anything on top of it. It's like an unstable foundation. So some word learning strategies that they talk about on this slide: using dictionaries, encouraging students to use dictionaries outside of class to look up words they don't know, especially if they're doing readings. If they're doing readings and I don't know a word, then I'm not going to comprehend what's being written. I have to look up the words. Prefixes, suffixes, and roots. We gotta teach those to our students. We have to help them. And context clues, which we will talk about more. But just remember that good teachers include these strategies in every lesson. In every lesson. That's how important the vocabulary is. So it can be anywhere from 5 minutes to 30 minutes, an hour, right? It doesn't have to be your whole class. So, let's say we're talking about sleep. I mentioned it before, right?
Yeah.
If we're talking about sleep, what strategies can we use every day to make sure that the students understand key vocabulary related to the topic of sleep and the sleep habits of people? How about you guys discuss this for just a couple of minutes with each other? What are some strategies that you could use in class to make sure that your students know the vocabulary around sleep? You can talk together. You may have discussed, yes?
So we talked about having the students keep a sleep log or a sleep tracker for a week, and then update it every day and ask each other questions in comparison. What do you do before you sleep? How is your sleep happening? And then have them use sentences to use the word form. So I slept, sleeping, sleepy, all those word forms and sentences.
Nice. Great. Anybody else?
We think about like when we give the students sleep by pictures and body language, and ask again the student to tell us some stories related to the habits. Okay, ask them to tell us something from their home. We connect the information from the sleep with their reality, what they practice.
Great. Great. All of these are great strategies. There's a couple that I've found that work really well with in-class activities that you can do. One is brainstorming. So if I have a topic like sleep, I'm going to be talking about it for a week or whatever the timeline is for my unit. I want to know what words can students just automatically come up with and talk about sleep. So I'll have them brainstorm, and I might create a web like this. Because one thing that you should know is, and some of you may already know this because you're trained teachers, your brain puts things into boxes. And it is much like a map, and like file folders inside of each box, okay? So if I'm talking about sleep, if I'm learning in my native language, there are other words that will automatically attach themselves to sleep, right? So for example here, snooze, rest, nap, tired, dream, wake. They're all related to sleep, okay? And of course, these are all easy words. There are other words such as deprivation. We'll get there, okay? But this is one idea that you can use and helps the students to think on their own. It's just a short activity. You can do this in class, have your students come up with it. It activates all their knowledge about sleep. It gives you an idea of where the learners are. Because if they don't come up with anything, that's going to be a difficult lesson. Okay, here's another. So for example, if you have a target word that you're talking about, for example, deprivation. So sleep definitely goes with deprivation. Deprivation is a tier 2 word. My students might not know that it's commonly associated with sleep. Sleep deprivation. So if I want to use deprivation, then I might have students come up with a synonym for it, an antonym for it. What part of speech is deprivation? Well, I can know if I break it into parts, and I know that TION is the suffix is a noun. So I know it's a noun, right? I might write other info such as that it also can be deprived. I'm sleep deprived, which is adjective. Good. English teacher here.
I have an English question.
Yeah.
What are the difference between synonyms and antonyms?
So synonym, this is word that means similar.
Yeah.
Antonym, the opposite.
Oh, okay.
So of deprivation, can somebody give me an antonym for deprivation?
Sleeping well?
If we're talking about sleep, yes? So start with synonym first. A synonym might be lack of sleep, right? Or to withhold sleep. That's a little bit more forceful, okay? And the opposite of sleep deprivation,
Enough sleep?
Abandon?
excess. There you go. So these types of things are very important for students. And just one couple of words like this before you start your lesson really gets the students thinking about what they're going to be talking about, right? And as an educator, if you see that your students couldn't do this at all, then you know you have a major problem. And that student has a major problem. And how do I help that student? Where does that student need to go for help? What's missing? Right? Yes?
Lamia, I teach chemistry, right?
Yes.
Yeah, she's talking about tier 3 words. How do you implement this for tier 3 words?
So a tier 3 word such as like renal. So I was using renal. So you can do this. You don't have to do all these bubbles. You can do the ones that are easiest. So for example, I definitely want my students to know that the synonym of renal is kidney.
But
They-
still, there is no connection between the word and the other word. You understand? They know it in Arabic, and they talk in Arabic. So it's hard for them to memorize the tier 3 words.
The tier 3 words,
Yes.
right? It's because they have a lack of knowledge of the tier 2. And that's where our encouragement of their independent reading and the things they do outside of class are just as important as what we do in the class.
You know what's the problem? They translate, even if you give them like articles, they translate all of the articles in Arabic. Then they stand up and
أنا يعني in the first 2 class يعني first 2 weeks I was يعني talking Arabic more, but then now I'm asking them to talk in English more. Because if they memorize it in Arabic, they will not be able to study it in English and answer questions and quizzes, and they will forget all about the English. They will only focus on the Arabic. If they start to give me the whole sentence in Arabic, I told them no, this is not our education here. We have to again think in English and express it in English.
But the missing piece here, they don't have the try 1 and try 2, just come suddenly with the try 3. So you have to just
What
go
I do
from
in
try
the
1.
beginning of the class, when I show them the content that I will talk about it, I ask them, are you familiar with this word?
Yeah.
Are you familiar with? So in the beginning, I established in my head here what words is hard for them and it's new for them. They don't know at all.
Yeah.
Maybe some words, some of the students know, some others they don't know. So I assess in the beginning of the class because this is my first
It can be very challenging.
nursing class.
It is. It's not-
It can be very challenging.
Yeah, it's
because you're dealing with
challenging.
second language learners. It's not in their first language.
Right.
Yes.
Okay? So this is important even for the first language,
But do you encourage the Arabic translation or not?
No.
This is what I'm
When you
doing.
are learning a language, it's really horrible to translate. We tell our students in PYD not to translate, to avoid it.
Really?
Because what happens is
actually.
a word that you will use, for example, a word like deprivation. We don't use this anywhere. I couldn't think of one example other than with sleep.
Yeah.
We only use deprivation, sleep deprivation. We only use it there. If somebody puts it somewhere else in another context, it's wrong. So in English, when we're telling them, we rarely have them translate because it will translate to something that in Arabic is not exact because they would use it in a different context in Arabic. Because the translations are not exact. I mean, you've seen Google Translate. It's a mess. At least it's what my husband says. Okay? So, concept checking questions. This is an important concept if you are a teacher, even if you're teaching anything, not even vocabulary. You have to ask concept checking questions. If you don't ask them, we call them CCQs for short. You don't know if your students know. Okay? So again, I told you earlier, you can't ask, do you understand? Is this clear? Are there any questions about this? Students will say, yes, and no questions, miss. Let's go home. Let's have lunch. Okay? They're not going to ask. Unless you have that one highly motivated student. Maybe. Okay? So if you give students something like this,
It's hard to read.
and they have to read this, this is about sleep, this is an article about sleep, okay? So if I give this to my students, and this is an assignment for them, they need to read it. Number one, they cannot translate it. Don't let them translate it. And if I'm doing this as an activity in the class, where we're trying to gather information from this article, which is a very good way, by the way, to teach content area, is to present them with research articles and allow them to extract information from the article, okay? So if I'm teaching this, I need to have a way to know, did they understand what they read when they read this? Because they read it, I want to discuss it with them, but before we discuss as a class, I need to know, did they understand? So what do I do? I need to ask something. So what you can do is, you can first make statements. Make your own summary of this article. What is it saying? So for me, when I read this, it's two main points. Not getting enough sleep has negative effects, and people who do not get enough sleep suffer from reduced job performance. Okay? That's the two that I got. I made two statements, because making statements is pretty easy. You can summarize this in your own words. Then I need to take those statements and turn them into questions. So, not getting enough sleep has negative effects. Is sleep deprivation good or bad? If they don't know that it's bad, then they didn't understand that it has negative effects. This should be an easy question. What are some of the negative side effects of sleep deprivation? There are several listed, but definitely they should have seen reduced job performance. Okay? So if they didn't get those, if I ask these, nobody in the class knows, then we don't understand this. Then I have a problem. Right? Then I have a problem. So, your turn. So I have a shorter one. I have a shorter one here. What I would like for you to do is just to look at this, try to make one statement, just one, as a summary, and then form a question from it. Form a CCQ that you can ask about this paragraph. Right? If it's easier for you to do the statement than a question, some of you might just be able to do the question.
It is hard to see and read.
I'm sorry, the consequences of drowning.
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Another one?
Mine was more of a general one.
Yeah.
I want them to give me a specific example about a nurse or the driver. So I would be like, what is a side effect, or what is the negative effect of not sleeping well or not having enough sleep? So they would give me the example of either the nurse or the drowning driver. So I know that they're reading. We can give the example.
Excellent. Anybody else? Right? On the same page?
Yeah.
Okay. So for me, there are two things here that the students, so here's what students will do. And I'll show you this when I'm back. There's from here, from according to, all the way to this comma. That's the name of an organization. Students will get so tied up in that thing that they won't actually get to the meaning. This is research. So first of all, if I'm a teacher, I give them this hint. I will just mark it out. Ignore this. Just look at this. Sleep loss is the leading cause of drowsy driving and sleep-related vehicle crashes. And the main idea of this, is that nurses who don't sleep enough are risking their health and safety. So if I am writing a question about this and I only wanted to do one, I would probably say something like, how are nurses risking their own health and safety through sleep deprivation? Something like this. And then if the students say, well, they may crash their car, they got it. And it does not need to be the words that are written there. It's even better if it's not, because it means they got it and they put it in their own words, which is a sign that they understood the concept. So I'm looking that they're not just repeating what's there, that they're making it into their own words. So, helping to put the words in context, you have to help students do this. Okay? This is a skill. This is particularly important for the English teachers in the room, but you may have a student that you're working on with one-on-one, if you're a content teacher, and this may be applicable. So here is an example. I didn't know what this word meant. Okay? I don't watch Game of Thrones and Lord of the Rings and that style, that period of English. So I didn't know that raiment means clothes. Okay? But I can figure it out. Because look, it is our custom that the bride and groom, okay, only wear the finest raiment on their wedding day. The verb wear, in English, what do we use wear with?
Clothes.
Only with clothes. You rarely wear, maybe jewelry,
Yeah.
hair, but it's something on you, right? You don't wear other things. So, and if I'm talking about a bride and a groom and something that looks nice, then I'm probably talking about clothes. So I can learn the word from contents, but you have to teach your students how to do that. It's a skill you have to teach your students. Then they can do it on their own. Then when they're at home, they don't need to translate because they can figure it out from the context. So it's a really important skill. And also you can use pictures.
Yeah, pictures.
Pictures really help with new vocab. Okay, so in sum, everything that we talked about, why are we teaching vocabulary? It's the best predictor of academic success. If students don't have vocabulary, they won't learn anything, they won't make concepts, they won't be nurses. Right? Vocabulary development is an attainable goal. Students who put in the time can do it. Okay? I have seen students in the PYE. I have seen them go from 0 to 100. I've seen them come in very, very little, and they've worked really hard, and they really built their vocabulary. They focused on the vocabulary, and I've had teachers who were just so impressed. I've also had teachers who've kept a writing from Unit 1 of the first level to the last unit of Level 4, and the difference between that student in just a year's time is absolutely amazing. For students who are dedicated, they can do it. So it extends across all the curriculum areas. So again, no matter what subject we're teaching in the program, we want to make sure that we're teaching the students how important vocabulary is, and that we're using some of these strategies in our class to help students with vocab. And direct instruction will improve comprehension. So if the program doesn't teach any vocabulary ever, and it doesn't do so directly and use these strategies, then the students won't have the skills necessary to do what we want them to do, which is, I guess, potentially to be nurses, right? And they have a varied amount of knowledge they need to be good nurses. So sciences, I think there's some computers, there's math, it's everything, right? It's a little bit in everything. So we need to recognize that vocabulary is an important part of all of these. And I'm sure there are more strategies you can use. The English teachers probably know tons of them. They're a very good resource for this because they're usually trained in it. And I'm sure they're willing to share ideas. If you're a content area teacher and you're teaching something like chemistry or anatomy, again, helping your students with some of these strategies to do on their own could be how they could remember that specific words that are in your Tier 3 vocabulary. It could be teaching the students how to do this at home on their own. Just giving them a little skill, giving them a little help. How do I figure this out from context?
It is also a help for us.
Yeah?
Yeah, it's very.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Do you think it's better for us if we teach like the science 100% English, or like we use the terminology, the chemistry, like for example, chemistry terminology in English and the other in Arabic, in order for them to understand the content?
Well, that's a very difficult question to answer unless I know exactly what the expectation of it is when they graduate. So if I know what the expectation is of that student when they graduate, like I know they're going to be a nurse, is their potential, they want to get a job to be a nurse, right? So how much English do they need to use when they're a nurse? Do they need better reading comprehension of words in English than speaking? Or do they need to be able to speak and communicate?
I think it's beginning.
The multidisciplinary available in the hospital need to connect with all the team with the English, because not everyone is Arabic speaker in the hospital.
Yes.
Especially in Saudi Arabia, they have multi-nationality, multi-experience. يعني يعني if you go to the hospital you will see different people, يعني physicians coming from England, nurse coming from New Zealand, يعني you
Yes,
you
but
find this
they
much.
are only
It's a
speaking
challenge.
English.
So
They know
Saudi
the
nurse-
general, like, they know the general words in English and the, like, the scientific words. And we just, like, we want to understand, they want to understand the contents. They can't understand it if it's 100% English. You understand? So, I don't know if it's like,
يعني
Is your textbook in English?
hmm?
Is your textbook in English?
Yeah.
and the exam will be in
They can,
English.
yeah, and it
If
was-
they start to thinking Arabic all the time, they will not be able to answer questions on the exam. I had experiences before, but you have like start easy and then you have to have limits. No, now we will start the whole sentence.
I faced the issue.
When
here.
they increase the vocabulary, I think about your subject, they can start to talk about the whole Asian English. If you don't encourage them, especially in class, to talk in English,
I do.
one student, she like listed everything in the class by Arabic.
Yes.
I told her stop. She will affect the other students. They will start thinking in Arabic, and they will not be able to develop this. يعني it's a process, need time. I think this is my opinion.
Sorry, I gave my students a little bit of time before the anatomy test to study in class, and I was going around checking if they knew the vocabulary and things of that sort. And one of the things they did bring up was that it's very hard for them to take part of the lecture in Arabic, and then their textbook is in English, and then the test was in English as well. And I asked them, like I asked my class, I surveyed them, and I asked them, would it be easier for you to just take it all in one language, or to have a split? And majority, I think like almost all except for two said they prefer in one language because then they can focus in the one language.
Yes,
or
I agree with that.
back and forth.
It's very difficult for students to be taught in two languages.
Yeah.
Any
They said-
subject.
They said
you know?
specifically that they felt like they were missing out in both languages, like when like stuff were basically getting lost in translation. So I did ask them before the anatomy test, and I was gonna share. I didn't know
Thank
what
you,
they
you
did.
helped my student.
Yeah, thank you.
I think